DeAndre Hopkins just said something that honestly might really upset a lot of people in Baltimore. And when I first saw this quote, my immediate reaction was, no way. He really said that? Because we're talking about a guy who just played for the Ravens, and now he's openly showing interest in playing with the biggest rival in the division. But this situation gets even worse once you hear exactly what Hopkins said about Joe Burrow, and why Ravens fans are reacting so strongly to it right now. There's one specific part of this interview that completely changes how a lot of people are going to look at his time in Baltimore. And the second that clip started making the rounds online, the reaction was immediate. Being completely honest, I think this comment from DeAndre Hopkins really bothered Ravens fans, because this wasn't just a random compliment toward another NFL quarterback. During an interview with Sports Illustrated, Hopkins was asked which quarterback he's never played with but would love to catch passes from. His answer? Joe Burrow. And the way he answered instantly grabbed attention. Hopkins said, I think Joe is one of the best. I love his game, his toughness. He took his team to a Super Bowl early in his career. So this wasn't some quick throwaway answer. He genuinely started praising the Bengals quarterback, talking about his mentality, his toughness, and his ability to lead a team deep into the postseason. For me, that's where this really hits hard in Baltimore, because we're talking about the Ravens' biggest division rival. Ravens vs. Bengals has become one of the most intense rivalries in football over the last few years, especially with the constant Lamar Jackson versus Joe Burrow debate. So when a player who just wore purple and black starts talking about Burrow like this, Ravens fans are obviously going to react. What makes it even more awkward is the context surrounding Hopkins' time in Baltimore. When he first arrived, expectations were legitimately high. A lot of people believed he could help Lamar Jackson in big moments and bring veteran leadership to the offense. But once the season started, things never really clicked the way fans hoped they would. The production was disappointing, and there were multiple games where Hopkins was basically invisible in the offense. So imagine how a lot of Ravens fans felt hearing this interview now. A player who barely made an impact in Baltimore is suddenly talking about wanting to play alongside Joe Burrow. And honestly, that only reopened the conversation about how disappointing his Ravens stint really was compared to the expectations people had when he signed with the team. The truth is, DeAndre Hopkins' time with the Ravens fell way short of the expectations that came with his arrival in Baltimore, and I still remember how excited people were when the move first happened. Even though Hopkins was no longer in his prime, he still carried the reputation of being one of the most respected wide receivers in the NFL. A lot of fans looked at that signing and thought Baltimore had finally added the experienced target Lamar Jackson needed. And honestly, the expectations made sense. The Ravens needed more experience in the receiver room, and Hopkins looked like the perfect fit for that role. Smart veteran, reliable hands, a guy who had played in huge games before. But once the season actually started, things never really came together the way people imagined. The chemistry never consistently developed, and little by little, his impact on the offense became smaller and smaller. The numbers tell the story pretty clearly. Hopkins finished the season with just 330 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. For a player with his resume, that's simply not enough. And the frustrating part wasn't only the stats. There were stretches where it honestly felt like he wasn't even a major part of Baltimore's offensive game plan. Some games went by where he almost completely disappeared. For me, one of the most frustrating parts was the feeling that the opportunity was there for something bigger. The Ravens came into that season trying to build a more balanced offense around Lamar Jackson, and there was real hope that Hopkins could become that trusted target on third downs or inside the red zone. But that never consistently became reality during the year. Now, when you combine all of that with these comments about Joe Burrow, the reaction from Ravens fans gets even worse, because a lot of people are looking back and thinking, wait a second, he couldn't make it work here, but now he wants to play for the rival? And that just makes this whole situation feel even more uncomfortable in Baltimore. One thing this entire situation also made very clear is just how much respect Joe Burrow still has around the NFL. Even with injuries and some frustrating seasons lately, players still view him as one of the most dangerous quarterbacks in football. And honestly, I think that probably frustrates Ravens fans because they know exactly how dangerous Cincinnati becomes when Burrow is healthy. When Hopkins says, I think Joe is one of the best, that carries weight. We're talking about a veteran wide receiver who has played with multiple high-level quarterbacks throughout his career and understands what elite quarterback play actually looks like. So hearing someone like Hopkins speak about Burrow that way only reinforces the reputation Burrow has built since entering the league. What's really impressive is how fast Burrow built that reputation. Not long after entering the NFL, he already had the Bengals in the Super Bowl and completely changed the perception of the franchise. Before Burrow arrived, Cincinnati wasn't viewed as a consistent threat in the AFC. That changed fast. Now, the Ravens understand that every division race goes directly through Joe Burrow, and I think that's a huge reason why offensive players are so interested in playing with him. Quarterbacks like that attract veterans because they give players confidence that the offense will work and the team will compete at a high level. Hopkins basically hinted at that when he said Burrow could get back to the Super Bowl with a little bit of help. He clearly still sees Cincinnati as a dangerous team in the conference, which also raises an interesting question about Hopkins himself. Complimenting Burrow is one thing, but would joining the Bengals actually make sense for him at this stage of his career? Being completely honest, I really do wonder if going to Cincinnati would make that much sense for DeAndre Hopkins right now. Admiring Joe Burrow and wanting to play with him is one thing, but when you actually look at the Bengals roster, it becomes a completely different conversation. And once you look at Cincinnati's receiver room, it's hard to picture Hopkins arriving as a truly major piece of that offense. The Bengals already have one of the strongest offensive groups in the NFL. Joe Burrow gets a ton of attention naturally, but a huge part of that comes from the weapons Cincinnati already has around him. So the big question becomes, where exactly would Hopkins fit in? Would he really arrive as a featured target, or would he simply become another complementary option in the offense? And for me, that's the biggest part of this discussion, because Hopkins clearly isn't the same dominant receiver he was during the best years of his career anymore. Last season made that pretty obvious, both with the Ravens and even in some recent stretches before Baltimore. The explosiveness has declined, the production has dropped, and right now he looks much more like a veteran trying to find the right situation to stay relevant in the NFL. At the same time, it's easy to understand why Cincinnati would appeal to him. We're talking about an aggressive offense led by a quarterback that players across the league respect. Receivers love playing in systems like that because they know they'll have opportunities to produce. Hopkins basically hinted at that during the interview when he talked about Burrow. There's clearly real admiration there for the way Burrow runs that offense. But looking at the situation realistically, I honestly don't know if this partnership would have the impact some people are imagining. And while this possibility starts getting more attention, Ravens fans are already thinking about another uncomfortable scenario, seeing Hopkins line up for a division rival. If you're enjoying this breakdown, smash that like button to help the purple flock grow. For a lot of Ravens fans, there's a line you just don't cross in the NFL, and putting on the jersey of a direct AFC North rival definitely falls into that category. That's why this entire DeAndre Hopkins and Joe Burrow situation created such a huge reaction in Baltimore, because even though Hopkins isn't the same superstar he once was, nobody likes imagining a former Ravens player helping a division rival. And honestly, I think the current Ravens-Bengals rivalry makes this feel even bigger. These games stopped feeling normal a long time ago. There's a constant battle for control of the division, non-stop comparisons between Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow, and the understanding that these teams will probably keep fighting for playoff positioning for years. So any move involving players connected to both sides instantly becomes a massive story. At the same time, some Ravens fans are trying to look at this rationally. The reality is Hopkins didn't produce much in Baltimore. He finished with only 330 yards and 2 touchdowns. So there are definitely people saying, if he couldn't make a real impact here, maybe it wouldn't change much in Cincinnati either. And honestly, I understand that perspective too. But rivalries in the NFL are rarely just logical. A lot of it is emotional for fans. Seeing a former Ravens player publicly praise Joe Burrow and openly talk about wanting to play in Cincinnati automatically creates tension. Especially because situations like this fuel trash talk, debates, and all the drama that surrounds the AFC North every single season. And there's another important part of this story too. Baltimore knows how quickly small moments inside the division can become massive storylines. One touchdown in a head-to-head matchup, one clutch play, or even one interview can become fuel for a rivalry for months. That's exactly why Hopkins' comments grabbed so much attention from Ravens fans. And honestly, this entire story just proves how nothing stays small inside the AFC North. One interview suddenly became a huge topic in Baltimore because it involved a former Ravens player openly praising Joe Burrow. And even though DeAndre Hopkins isn't the same dominant player he used to be, Nobody enjoys the idea of a former Raven potentially helping a direct division rival, especially after such a disappointing stint with the team. It also became very clear just how much respect Joe Burrow still has around the NFL. Hopkins' comments proved that immediately. But at the same time, a lot of Ravens fans are looking at this situation wondering what could have been different during Hopkins' time in Baltimore. Because when he first arrived, there was real hope that he could help Lamar Jackson and elevate the offense. That simply never became reality. And now I want to hear from you. Would you be upset seeing DeAndre Hopkins playing in Cincinnati alongside Joe Burrow? Or do you think it wouldn't really matter because of how disappointing his Ravens run was? Let me know in the comments because I really want to hear your thoughts on this entire situation. And if you're a true Ravens fan and love keeping up with everything happening around the team, don't leave this video without sharing it with a friend who's just as passionate. They're definitely going to enjoy this. See those videos on your screen right now? I picked the first one especially for you, and the other is recommended by YouTube. Go check them out and I'll see you in the next video.